most workers, listen to this, being 92% think they have strong emotional intelligence, but fewer than 74% believe that their bosses do.
Is the thought of being imperfect keeping you from taking action? Welcome to Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans. Each week, we give you real-life stories and thought-provoking research that inspires your soul to live a more fulfilled life through your own actions. From the heart of Calgary, Canada, here are your hosts, award-winning coaches, Christopher Lawrence and Kalloo.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, madame and monsieur, everyone. Welcome to another exciting week of our podcast. You know what was happening for me there, Christopher?
You weren't paying attention as usual?
No, I was saying to myself, remember the name. And then by saying that, remember the name, I forgot the messed it up. So Inspired Action for Imperfect Human Podcasts. And I didn't even look it up. So this is great. Listen, how you doing, buddy?
I don't know. I keep thinking I need to get you like a packet of Post-its or something so you can write yourself a reminder about what our podcast is called that we've been doing for 4 seasons.
I think you're on to something there. But I think, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it has something to do with my emotional intelligence, that I'm so emotionally connected with self that my intelligence is really about myself and not external. Could that be it? Do you think that's
no, not at all. Not at all.
Now, listen, I wanted to chat about emotional intelligence today, only because you and I have gone back and forth, and we've worked with different people, and we've spoke about this, on different occasions when it comes to emotions, because there's still this thing around keeping emotions out of the organization, keeping emotions, sometimes even in our personal relationships, right? When we get so emotionally engaged, sometimes it goes off. And then we talk about it's okay to be mindful for your emotions. So I'm just wondering, which is it? Have emotions? Don't have emotions? Does emotion intelligence actually speaks to it? What's the final word on emotions?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting thing, Kyle, and it's something that I pay a lot of attention to, because certainly when I was working in a corporate, I'll tell you a story here. Mm-hmm. On 3 separate occasions in my work career, I was criticized as being too emotional.
Really?
And in 2 cases, I was called Mr. Sensitive, which is well, it doesn't. I'll just say it doesn't happen anymore.
No, I'm just saying, is that a problem though, to be sensitive? I mean, I think with context, maybe.
Well, I think this is the problem though, is that I think you have to remember, and honestly, we don't do this very often on our podcast, but I think that this actually has to do with like white male heterosexual bias in a way, because if you look at it, it's like it started, I don't know when, but like the weaker sex is women, and it's because women are emotional. Right. And so I'm wondering if there's some carry through from that, where emotions are not seen as high currency in the workplace. But I think what's not actually seen as high currency in the workplace is when people lose control of their emotions. I think that's the bigger issue here. It's interesting. I coach a couple of, excuse the term, but alpha males. And the reason why they're young alpha males, but they're so woke, and they're like, even though I'm going to be a tribe leader one day,
right?
And in some cases are, right, like they're both in leadership positions. They recognize that they have to understand their own emotions to be able to lead effectively. And so I'm so privileged to be able to coach them, honestly. In my own case, it was so funny because the last time somebody says, "Wow, you're really sensitive about these things," hey, I reacted by slamming the door and saying, bet your bottom dollar I'm goddamn sensitive. I'm like, that's why my team performs the best out of any team in this company. And we've got the numbers to prove it. That's why you give me the biggest raises and biggest bonuses. It's because I'm self-aware. So the next time you're going to insult me by calling me Mr. Sensitive, you're going to attach a big fat paycheck to it because you're taking advantage of it. You might not like the liability of it, but I'll get impassioned about it if you want. I've learned a few things since then, but
yeah, I mean, I've said this often where I actually like that someone is emotionally connected, right? Yes, I agree. Sometimes someone can get really emotional and to the point where it's disruptive. However, there's something behind that that's worth exploring, right? We can't just say, oh my God, that person's so sensitive. Oh, that person takes everything so literal. That there's something going on. And I think, I'd rather that because then it allows for dialogue. I think it allows for you to be able to uncover and engage that person versus the one that you don't even know what's happening. I mean, I'd be worried about those folks, right? Where we don't even know what's happening because there's people who do that, right? I
totally agree. It's interesting too, because I think that there's a lot of confusion about like what is, I worked with a guy. He was a very old school guy. He was a contractor and he was known for getting results. But the way that he got results, and I'm not even kidding you, like prior to him working with us in the 80s and 90s, he'd walk into a room and he'd be like, we missed the project deadline. You're all fired. And he would fire the whole room, the entire project team of 30 people on the spot. And that's seen as, that's seen as like leadership or as like taking charge. And it's like, that's really appropriate in one case, which is probably if all 30 people had risked the lives of somebody else by neglecting safety or something. I think that kind of reaction is appropriate. But I think because there's this bias that's getting results and that's whatever, that's seen as currency rather than as actually just another emotional reaction. Like that person is just as sensitive as I am, and maybe more so actually, because I never did that. It's interesting here, Kyle, when we look at like emotional intelligence here, there's some interesting findings in research. So I've got a few of them to go through here, but this, I think that this is like when you look at the numbers and you pay attention to them, it tells a story. And I'm not sure it's a story that people want to hear, even about themselves. So in the workplace, more than 1 in 5 employees, so 21%, believe emotional quotient is more valuable in the workplace than intellectual quotient.
Oh, wow.
And then nearly, so basically 21%. So nearly 2/3, 65% said that the two are equally important. So that's good. That's a more representative number. Most workers, listen to this, being 92% think they have strong emotional intelligence, but fewer than 74% believe that their bosses do.
Interesting.
That's a total disconnect.
Yeah. Oh, totally. It's like we've been saying lately about a lot of these research we've been looking at as what's happening in the workplace. And there seems to be some consistency between what the employee group feels and think and what the employers think and feel. So yeah, this is just another one of those things where we're like, there's a big disconnect there again.
There's a disconnect. And I'll tell you something. In my experience, I think when they say 92% think they have strong emotional intelligence, I would say that in reality, that number is probably less than 30%. I actually think less than 30% of people have really strong emotional intelligence. I think most people have adequate emotional intelligence. I'll give you a couple of a quick. There's a few more of these, but I think we need to come back here and define emotional intelligence. So basically. Emotional intelligence is most often defined as the ability to perceive, to use, to understand, manage, and handle emotions. So basically, the idea is not that we're checking our emotions at the door, but actually that we're recognizing our emotions and using them and understanding them in the workplace effectively, and in our lives, rather than trying to avoid them or check them at the door. And in fact, those who avoid and check them at the door have low emotional intelligence. Those that are uncomfortable with others' emotions have lower emotional intelligence. And it is a liability to have lower emotional intelligence. Why is this important? Like, why not just check it at the door?
Right. Now, could you hold that thought for a second? Because I wanted to add a little bit to it, just when we're talking about the definition and the key areas and I'm not sure what you have in front of you, if you're going to touch on some of this, but as well, I just wanted to give some folks some context, if that's okay. You cool with that? Yeah. So
no, not really, but
it was,
I mean,
guys, I get to talk,
go
guys.
ahead.
Listen to this. I'm going to chat. Daniel Goldman first brought emotional intelligence to a wide audience in his book that was done in 1995. The book of that name was Emotional Intelligence, right? He found that while the qualities of traditional associated with a leadership such as intelligence, toughness, determination, and vision are required for success, they are insufficient. Like what we're saying, before, of just, how we do things, we need to be mindful about not just checking things at the doors, because there's other elements that plays a role in that. Truly effective leaders are also distinguished by high degree of emotional intelligence, right? Now, here's the main area, which includes self-awareness. This is the ability to recognize what you're feeling, to understand the habitual emotions, responses to events, and to recognize your emotions, right? So even checking at the door kind of concept is not always going to work. Yes, it's good for you to be mindful, and you might have to say, hey, I have to play this out. I can't just go in and say, hey, everyone, I'm aware of myself, I'm emotional right now, and everyone has to deal with it. That's not what we're saying. And I think we're going to touch on that a little bit. The other area was managing emotions, the ability to stay focused and think clearly, even when experiencing powerful emotions, because sometimes someone might lose a loved one, someone might had a fight with their significant other, someone might be nervous about a certain task or project. The third area was motivating oneself, the ability to use deepest emotions to move and guide you towards your goals, right? Because that's really what it is. And you and I have talked about, self-motivation before. The next area, there's two more here. The next area was empathy, right? The ability to sense, to understand, and respond to what other people are feeling. Hence, checking at the door when someone's coming in, feeling a certain way, we can't just ignore, like, I'm going to stay away from him today. He seems emotional, right? And the final one was social skill, the ability to manage, influence, and inspire emotions in others, because we're human. We all kind of work together.
When did that model come out? Did you give a year
1995.
There?
Yeah, 1995.
I suspect that some of that has been deconstructed now. Things like when we look at like motivation and stuff like that, I don't think that that's a factor in emotional intelligence at all. I think I shouldn't say at all. I think it's a factor from the perspective that we recognize that motivation will come and go like all emotions, and motivation is driven by emotion. It's not, it's so it's interesting. So if we're trying to control motivation, we have to control our emotions, but controlling our emotions isn't always what emotional intelligence is about. So I find that, I think that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing. I think girl, when
that's
I say
thank you for sharing,
girl, when we say thank you for sharing, that means I'd like to move on now. That's what that really means.
I think, like I said, it was initial, that it came to the wide audience at that point. But I agree with you. You and I have seen a lot of different things where there's some evolution of it, right? And just simplification in certain areas and some certain areas of clarity.
Yeah, totally. So I think that there's some really interesting things here for us to pay attention to. The reason why we have to have this in our workplaces is because you cannot bypass human emotion in the body. You cannot bypass. There was a meta-analysis done on thousands and thousands and thousands of studies. And what they know is that it is tied to our physiology, meaning unless you are not neurotypical, you cannot bypass human emotion. Now, you might lead with emotion in certain circumstances, and you might keep emotion tucked back in certain circumstances, right? And you might change it up once in a while. And as a default, your preference might be to lead with emotion, or your preference might be to keep it tucked back. But I know what we're seeing in terms of like workplace engagement and workplace retention, which is a huge thing in 2022, You know, here in Canada and the States where there are labor shortages, and, you know, really we're kind of headed into hyperinflation, it looks like here, if you look at our fuel prices, holy crap. Right. So you look at this kind of stuff and it's like emotional intelligence is going to be the name of the game here, as we kind of move into this next phase of kind of like workplace economics. Right. And when I say workplace economics, I'm like, what is defined as currency? So education is currency, experience is currency. I think leadership skills are currency, and not just for leaders, but in all people. And I think the ability to effectively follow as well. But I think emotional intelligence is at the top of the list.
Yeah. So what can people do?
Well, I think, Kyle, there's a part here where you derailed my thought. I don't want to talk about what people can do yet.
You're okay to give me the 5-minute mark, the 3-second mark, but when you're
by the
on
way,
the
Kyle,
soapbox,
we got 5 minutes now that you're talking. I think this is interesting too. Did you know that more than 6 out of 10? So this is of people who admit it, which means that the number is higher. When we look at self-reported data with stuff like this, 6 and 10, so 61%. Admitted that they've let their emotions get the better of them in the office, which means it's probably closer to 80%. And that 20% probably isn't identifying what they're doing as an emotion.
They might be in it, but don't even identify it.
Kyle, have you let your emotions get the better of you at the office?
Never.
When and where?
Never.
Yeah, exactly. Folks, you know that this is a lie. He's doing it right now. So Kyle, what should people do about this?
Well, there's a couple of things I think. Well, one, as coaches, we can test, right? There's a lot of little tests that's out there and what have you to be able to, go through those.
What's one of the tests that people can reach out to you for?
We have an EI test that we do, right? There's a self-reporting EI test that we ask some questions around some of those areas that we've talked about. The other thing too is just people being mindful, right, of the emotion, right? Like no matter what it is. So if you go to a meeting, if you're interacting, sometimes you have to stop and just say, and I love this question that I always share with my clients and folks is what I'm feeling or thinking right now, is that based off feelings or facts? It's just being aware, just asking myself what I'm experiencing right now. Is that based off feelings or facts, right? Because feelings is like, hey, I don't know, right? Because the story we start telling ourselves is this guy thinks, he hates me, she hates me, she this, she what, but I don't actually know that for sure. So I have some emotional feeling around a situation. So just be mindful of it would be one of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to expand on that. I think one of the key things here that people often miss, and man, like if you can do this with your kids, you're going to change their lives. The idea here is to actually get better at labeling your emotions. So this isn't all of emotional intelligence, but the first step is awareness. And that's like anything in life. You want to lose weight, you have to create awareness around what you're eating and how much and how often and what you're feeling. If you want to be less angry at work, you have to create awareness around it. So everything starts with awareness. And so emotional labeling is one aspect of emotional intelligence. And I do think that people should have an emotions list in front of them. I think that they should look at how intense that emotion is and they need to label it. And checking a couple of times a day can be really, really helpful. What they have noted is that the more granular, so they call it emotional granularity. This is what the researchers are calling it, emotional granularity. Your ability to get super granular with labeling your emotions, so meaning you've got lots of words for your emotions, actually creates that flexibility in your thinking. So this is totally appropriate for a workplace because how often are people in fixed thinking? Right. And the fixed thinking is almost always emotionally driven. Yeah. So if people can understand, like if you say that I check my emotions at the door and blah, 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 but you're a stick in the mud, you do not have high emotional intelligence in that moment, right? Like I think that people just read it as a certain currency, right? So I think you got to get really good at labeling emotions. And
I like that. If I could share just two quick questions that usually comes up when we do that self emotional checklist. There's something I mentioned earlier. The first question was, I realize immediately when I lose my temper, right? Does that always apply to you? Does it does not apply to you? And the second one is, I can reframe bad situations quickly, and not only at the workplace, what about your relationships, right? Are you mindful of your temper? Right? Because I think sometimes when we're in a comfortable situation, like a home, a friendship, or what have you, we tend to probably be not as quick to recognize that. We're quite secure in that, and we feel that we show a lot of emotions in that.
I totally agree, Kyle. And I think that if, we talk about anger, but I think it goes the other way too. I worked with a woman who said that, like, when she's upset, if she can just have her 20 minutes to cry, that's all she needs, then we can move on. And I'm like, hey man, I'm like Mr. Emotional, apparently, according to my previous workplaces, but that's actually not appropriate. Like, that's a codependency. So if you need that, go take a break, step outside, go cry. Like, I have no problem with tears. I'm not uncomfortable with emotions. It's just not appropriate to hijack somebody's day. And I think in this case, it wasn't like a once a year thing. It was like a once a week thing. And I'm like, that's not like you can't hijack somebody's day and not expect them to be like, check your emotions at the door. Right. So the idea is to recognize where you are, take a break, go do the emotional thing, and then collect yourself and come back prepared to have a conversation. Right. But I think it goes both ways. It's not just angry people. I think it's also people who are quote unquote emotionally shut off and they're making decisions without the people factor. That totally reeks of low emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. And there's times where things will happen. And if you become what we called emotionally charged, there's something to be able to communicate that, something's happening for me right now. I need a moment, like you were saying, go and collect yourself and come back. Right. But also to communicate that with someone, because you might be in a conversation where you just have to say, this is really making me emotionally charged right now. Could you give me a moment and I will continue this conversation? It's not, I'm really emotionally charged, so stop. No, like, we still have to move forward.
Totally. I totally agree with you. Folks, your imperfect inspired action this week is to get in touch with your emotions in the workplace. Just note how you're feeling, get emotionally granular, and maybe even learn something like nonviolent communication, where you learn to communicate your emotions effectively. See you next week.
It's our goal to build a global community of inspired action takers, and we can only do that with your help. So if you love inspired action, please leave a review on your favorite podcasting app and share us on your socials. You've heard from us. Now we want to hear from you. Go to inspiredactionpodcast.ca and tell us, what is the inspired action you took this week? Next week on Inspired Action for Imperfect Humans.
And I thought was interesting, when the gunman was yelling at the manager to open the safe, he stopped and he looked at him and says, relax, just give me a break, I'm trying to open the safe. Right. And I'm thinking at this point, oh my God, he's gonna get shot. Like, it's just